I'm Erik Naso with Newsshooter.com, and I'm joined with Matt Allard and the international man of mystery over there, Chung. How you guys doing?
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're pumped, I can tell. Must be the end of the show.
Yeah. Thanks for having me back.
Hey, it's good to see you too, Dan.
I thought you'd never want me back.
Dan's back almost 10 years to the day when you first wrote the first ever article on Newsshooter.
That is true.
On DSLR Newsshooter at the time.
Yeah. Should we tell them it's available?
No.
No.
The domain is not available. Do not look for it.
All right, guys, so the show is pretty much over. Today's the last day. I liked the show. I thought it was good. It was crowded. Not a lot of camera news, but we have a couple things to talk about. So let's talk about cameras. What did you guys think about what you saw? It's mostly Sony, and also we'll talk about codecs and RAW, because that's really kind of the story now. More, it's like behind the camera as opposed to the actual camera these days. Matt, what do you think?
Well, FX9, C500 Mark II were the two obvious announcements. C500 Mark II right before the show, FX9 on the first day of the show. Sort of aimed at the same type of crowd to a certain extent. C500 Mark II, an interesting camera. I think it's the first time in a long time that Canon have actually released a camera that's probably caught the attention of a lot of people.
Yep.
In a lot of ways, it's cannibalizing the C700, which is something we haven't seen Canon do before either, putting sort of specs that almost outperform the C700 in some ways in a lower cost camera. The only problem for me that I see is that it's in an interesting price point. That mid-tier market is all but dissolved away, and now we have sort of two marketplaces there, if you will. The under $10,000 range cameras, and then you sort of jump up to $30,000, $40,000. There's not a lot left in the middle there, and it was interesting because with the FX9, Sony sort of basically told us that they're not going to renew the F5, F55 range. They're going to have the FX9 or the FS7 Mark II, and then you jump straight up to Venice. So that middle ground has sort of disappeared now. So it'll be interesting to see who Canon can attract there. For the FX9, it's in an interesting place in the market. The sub $10,000 market is very crowded now, but I think it's not a bad upgrade. I think a lot of people are going to think, no 6K, no RAW recording, this sort of thing. But I think for the market that it's intended for, it's a nice little upgrade. It's full frame version of the FS7 with better autofocus. That's probably going to tick a lot of people's needs.
Mm-hmm. What do you think, Dan?
I think it's really very interesting. I mean, it's so funny. On specification, they could almost be on the same product range. So it would be, you go FX9, C500 Mark II, Venice. Let's not talk about C700. But anyway, C500 Mark II, I think actually on paper is the better camera in many ways. It has a lot of functions that we've all been talking about for years, and they are finally in the one camera. So in one way, it's a hallelujah camera, apart from the price. And I think that price also is not helped by the fact that you don't get an EVF with that. So you've got to, if you want an EVF, you've either got to buy a third-party EVF, a Secudo, a port keys, whatever, stick it on there, or you've got to stick a loop on your screen. But I think that screen is A, quite big for a loop, and B, that means your touchscreen AF is all not your touch screen. Actually, does it have touchscreen? Yeah, it does have touchscreen control, and it's the Sony that doesn't have touchscreen control, right?
No touchscreen.
So do you think there are differentiators between them?
Do you think the C500 Mark II really should have been the C300 Mark III?
Does it
at a certain extent?
I don't think it matters what it's
in
called.
In terms of pricing, though, do you think it should have been closer to $10,000?
I don't think I don't think that Canon in particular will hold their pricing for the length of the model, life cycle. So I think, I mean, historically, if you look at Canon models, they'll stay there, and then they'll go there, and then they'll go there. Yeah. Sony's FS7, for instance, is pretty consistent for a while because it was cheaper to start off with, and then it sort of dropped a little bit, and then it's only today we've really seen a sort of big drop on FS7, which is a 6.5.
I think like $5,000 now. I think.
Yeah, but no,
dropped $1,500.
It's like
6
years, 5 years. I'm going to get this wrong.
I'm going to say 6 years. I'm probably wrong, but
so
look it up on Google.
I don't think in a year's time that's maybe going to look too expensive. Maybe, but it's the packaging. It's like I think if you like touch screens, but you actually touch and focus, that's a good reason to go for a Canon. If you want the 6K, that's a good reason to go for a Canon. If you like Canon color science out of the box, I'm sure you'll be doing lots of comparisons of Venice color versus Sony's latest colors versus Canon's. That may be a reason. Historically, it has been. And form factor wise, they're both now kind of the same form factors. There's not too much in between on that. On the Sony front, it on paper seems like better value because actually they've improved the LCD to the point it's HD now, the LCD, which I didn't realise until I had a look at it. And so when you put the loop on it, it is much better than the FS7s or the FS7 II.
I never liked that loop. Well.
But then you don't have to change AF points. You've got to toggle with the nipple thing, which personally I don't like. Other people might prefer. I don't know. So I actually think, money aside, it's going to come down to personal preference for a lot of this stuff.
In terms of the C500 for me, Mark II, I just think it's really interesting to watch Canon sort of flip their own script a little bit on giving you a full-frame sensor that actually is going to do 5.9K, which is very rare for Canon to sort of jump their own shark a little bit, and to see that how the FX9 is not quite as punchy like with the specifications. It's usually just the opposite. Sony always has a lot more features, more resolution, more frame rates, where it looks like Canon's getting kind of they're willing to sort of like beat themselves a little bit, and I like to see that.
Sony has an out though, because Sony have literally an out, an SDI raw output, which can restore potentially, and they haven't been too clear about exactly what they're going to bring out of that output. They definitely said 4K 120, which is impressive, right? And they're going to do
with S35 crop.
S35 crop, but still to have full.
And they really couldn't do 6K because if you look at the Venice to get the full frame 6K license, it's $4,000. So Sony's not going to give you a 6K full frame camera when they've got a license.
They haven't ruled out. They haven't ruled. I mean, they haven't said they're going to do it
externally, possibly down the track.
Well, once all the cards are on the table now, they can all decide how they want to play this. Canon can also be more competitive with their pricing now that they know where Sony is. Sony can also add more features. So it's all possible. These things aren't locked boxes. They can do things with them. It's very interesting. Now, let's move forward and to talk about a bit about RAW, because I think it's interesting that that's also developing. Got Blackmagic's new Video Assist 12G that actually can do, their own BRA, which is such a strange thing to say. But Blackmagic RAW is very capable as well, and to be able to do it with the Canon and the Panasonic, the C500, C300 Mark II, and the EVA 1, opening up that for them to be able to do RAW is incredible, and also being in NLEs now. So they're going to have the plug-in for Avid as well as Premiere, and Atomos also is getting into Premiere and Edius and Avid as well. Was that what the announcement was?
Yeah. I mean, so basically the only one it's not in is DaVinci, I think. But I mean, again, this is a personal thing. It's the plug-in versus native support argument. I have historically not liked plugins, especially when you're looking at something as fundamental as the codec, because somebody updates something in the OS or the plugin or whatever, and suddenly you can't access. But I don't mind if you're doing something that you're never going to touch again after the day that you do it. That's not so bad. But anything where I don't think big organisations are going to touch stuff that requires a plugin that may go out of date, because you just don't know whether that's going to work in 5 years' time when you revisit the project. So I think
proper integration is really the way to go. I think it'll happen. It's there's so much going on in the back of this thing. We're talking about trading, their own design, getting involved in their own software and how it's working. And these are kind of that's their trade secrets, right? That's their secret sauce. So there's a lot of trust going on, but we also are seeing that happen a little bit more. And look, the consumers are going to win in this whole.
Well, yeah, it doesn't matter which one you prefer, whether it's Blackmagic RAW or ProRes RAW, right? There's two available options now there. I think the big news for consumers and for us, is that it's now available more widely spread over a lot of NLE platforms.
RAW is definitely becoming much more normal.
It has to, just like photography. Before, this was the same issues that we were having early days when we were shooting all JPEG or and we didn't have that RAW option. And even now today, I mean,
there's a place for JPEG.
Adobe is
There'll
fast.
be a place for compressed. You know.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't imagine
Every
too much
time a
like
camera
live
comes
news
out.
is going to get shot in RAW anytime soon.
Right.
You know, nor should it be for
Right.
the time being. Although interestingly, there is an argument that says that you maybe should capture a RAW version as well, because in a world of, you know, Trump and the disbelief in, you know, news media and everything else, having this conversation came up the night. You know,
It's verifiable.
can you verify
it's
that?
real.
You know, how do you know it's not a deep fake?
Right.
Well, here's the
Absolutely.
RAW file. You didn't see it at the time, but here's the
That's a good point.
timestamp, GPS located RAW file that, you know, unless you're some sort of, I don't know, Nobel winning physicist, you're not going to be able to fake that in any way, shape, or form. So, you know, I think that maybe there's a case even there.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Maybe small RAW, because Canon has small. Have you seen Canon small RAW in photos? So if you have a 1DX, whatever, you've got RAW, and then you've got small RAW, which gives you a small file, but it's still like, you know, it hasn't been tampered. It's interesting.
I think we're all waiting too to see what happens with you know, Red versus Apple in terms of the compressed raw recording inside a camera. If that sort of changes dramatically, that could have a massive effect on our industry, and everything's going to change again.
Everything will change. All right, excellent. Let's move forward. We got lighting and we got sound left. So let's go ahead and talk about lighting, because Erik did something pretty exciting. They're showing their new Orbit, and that's a really fascinating light. Matt, you did a great interview with one of the developers or one of the engineers that was working on it. What do you think of that light?
It's a pretty impressive lighting fixture, I think. It's taken them a long time to bring this to market, and it's mainly due to the technology, not due to them taking their time. It's that a lot of the technology that they're using in their light wasn't up to scratch or up to that point where it could be put into a product. So it took them a long time to do that. Arri's actually using their own proprietary LED system in there. So they've been able to shrink basically what's a large COB into a tiny, small area. So it's about, I think they said it's about a 70th of the size of the one that's in the M10. So they've been able to shrink that all down. And it's using a lot of very clever technology. And I was talking to Ari and specifically about the fact that we're now seeing hardware and software blending around, and now it's becoming more about the software than the hardware. And he said, yeah, you know, at Ari we now have twice as many people doing software as we have doing hardware.
That's an interesting point we can get onto in a bit.
Yeah.
But I think to circle back on software, I think it's an interesting thing that, you know, we as consumers have often thought the software is essentially where there isn't too much work, and therefore it should be like consistently free in an upgrade, and, you know, are surprised when some manufacturer pipes up and says, well, this license is going to cost you, but as you said, now you're saying they spent twice as much time and effort on the software.
Yeah. I mean, we all know
should it
software
be free
makes the
point,
hardware
you know?
work. Really, I mean, we get so frustrated with all kinds of devices, especially cameras, menu systems, software, drones. Software makes the hardware. I mean, without good software, the user experience could be a mess.
You know, and there's the whole Adobe argument and the paying for Adobe stuff, and it's that same argument. You know, is it actually fair? You might not like it, you might not like the cost, and you've got other alternatives, but actually you can see why Adobe, you know, want to charge you. They make a lot of money, but still, it's
particularly if you're adding features later on that were never promised at launch. You know, someone has to develop that. It has to be paid somehow. So, you know, it is that toss-up of whether the manufacturer tries to include that sort of price in their overheads when they first sell you that device, so that you're paying for potential firmware upgrades later down the track, or whether they keep it at a particular price point to get people invested, and then they charge on top of that. It's a, you know, it's a win-lose, win-win, lose-lose situation.
Yeah, well, it's like, you know, it's like, well, Blackmagic, for instance. You know, DaVinci is free on one level. But then there's the paid version. But then if you really want to use it in a professional environment, you then have to buy a ton of things. So you're paying. You're just not paying up front necessarily. It's, you know, you basically, there are multiple ways, but ultimately the aim of all companies in those halls over there is to get your cash.
Absolutely.
You know, and that's not, I don't mind. That's good. I've had my cash for many years. So.
Let's stay with lighting for just one more thing, because we're seeing higher output from COBs, that more in the affordable area. I mean, we have obviously very expensive, out of reach lighting that's in the film set world, but, you know, like Apertures with their new announcement with the 600D, that's a pretty impressive light. I think we're going to see more of that. Are you kind of excited about higher output LED? That
I think you've got to credit. Actually, you've got to credit the Chinese, frankly, for making COBs kind of standard within the indie and the news markets, because before nobody would touch them.
Yep.
Now you see fewer and fewer HMIs out.
Yeah.
And you're circling back with lighting again to that whole software hardware thing where, you know, the quality of most LED lights from all manufacturers, doesn't matter whether it's coming from China or somewhere else, they're all getting very, very good. There's very few ones out there that are actually like really bad. And so what's the standout between some of the lower spec lights and the higher quality lights seems to be now, again, coming back to the operating system, the software, what they're doing in there to make changes with the lights.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, talking of which, rotor light, you know, you're going to talk about the rotor light. What they've done to control that light, again, is very impressive. I don't know how much you looked at it, but the diffusion, so it's got a variable electronic diffusion on the front. But what I didn't realise is that diffusion actually has a slight colour shift as it diffuses. But they map that, so they measure the colour shift. So as you dim it, it then slightly changes the
in real time.
Temperature. So that's, you know, it's software.
Just by applying an electrical charge. I mean, it's almost sort of the same sort of way that electronic variable ND works in a certain way. You're getting that colour shift when you're applying a charge to something, and you need to fix that in real time.
What I found interesting is that Xylite finally got that active diffusion into one of their products. It's not as punchy, or not punchy, it's not as soft as I was hoping it would be. I think the active diffusion is actually too close to the elements. We all know we got to get that diffusion away from the light source in order for it to actually do its real
the road
purpose.
light, there's quite a bit of space actually between the front and the thing.
Yeah,
It's a little farther out.
Yeah.
Now what's interesting is they're going at it in two different ways, because the Rotolight, the rep there was telling me that their diffusion, or whatever you want to call it, is actually spreading the beam out as opposed to softening it, which does have that effect as well, because you are spreading it out. So it's almost more of a kind of a, you know, like a spot versus wide, where the active diffusion on the Xylite product is literally just softening it. And they have the same problem. They're adding a little bit of red as you turn the dial to get more active.
Well,
diffusion.
also with lighting, what we're seeing too is we're now seeing manufacturers making fixtures that are becoming multi-versatile. You no longer have soft sources, hard sources. A lot of these lights now can be used for multiple different, reasons, and that's pretty much what the Orbiter is like.
I think when we're not, and, there's a very interesting discussion running on a different forum about matching of lights to cameras and everything. I mean, I think what we haven't really seen is a concerted effort by the lighting industry to get anywhere near
a standard
for anything.
Sure makes mixing lights and brands together very difficult. It wasn't like that.
But I mean, it's not even brands. It's like just different models of light. If they sourced the LED chip from one manufacturer for this light in their range, and they sourced it from a different manufacturer and the other light in their range, they ain't going to match. And the work that needs to be done on how they play with different cameras. So you might have two lights that work together fine on one camera, but then they might look a bit weird because of the spike in a certain thing, which correlates with the spike in the sensor, the way it's easy image on another.
The Sky Panels was a perfect example of that. That light was particularly tailored to work with ARRI sensors, and if you use it with other cameras, it's actually got quite a big green spike, which is very visible when you use other type of camera systems, but it looks better with ARRI cameras. So yeah, again, mapping lights to cameras and actually coming up to some type of standard across the industry, which is difficult now because we're seeing so many standards. Well, no standards really. It's a free-for-all in a lot of cases.
Right.
So having an LED standard would be actually pretty good, so the consumer knows exactly what they're getting.
Having said that, I mean, I think, if there's a hope for, back to our original question, FX9 C500 Mark II, it's that they become the new standard in the same way that C300 and FS7 is. And so, yes, there's a battle between those two, but what does that mean for all the other camera manufacturers? Because I don't know what it's like in your production worlds, but in London, if you go in, really, it's still only FS7 or C300, or ARRI, obviously.
Yeah.
Is there any hope for anybody else to really crack into the news shooting, documentary shooting market now, or not?
not sure that's it. I mean, it's an interesting question. I think Panasonic and Blackmagic have both sort of tried, and I don't know whether they've sold quite a few of those cameras, but they haven't got the market sort of spread that we've seen with Sony with the FS7 and C300 Mark II. And it's interesting because you're still seeing a lot of new cameras coming to market, but it's still some of these older cameras that are still established and being required by production houses and broadcasters.
Well, I mean, what's funny with Blackmagic recorders is, of course, they've almost made the compelling argument, not if you wanted B-raw, and I'm not saying you want B-raw, but if you wanted B-raw, you had to buy G2. Now you can buy Canon or Panasonic and do B-raws. So you actually don't need to buy the G2 if you wanted B-raw. It's just a weird time. It's people cannibalizing themselves for whatever. I mean, yes, it's offering more choice, I guess, ultimately, which is your original point. But I think standards is what we're missing generally across the industry. Lighting standards, sensor, gamma standards. ASUS, if we could just have ASUS, adopted across the board, I think it would be wonderful. I think that's
HDR
great.
even.
Yeah. If we could just get down to 2 or 3 cameras that were the norm, it would actually make lighting and filters and everything else just that much easier. It's not going to happen.
No, probably the reason why we don't have a standard is this stuff is moving so fast. I mean, technology is constantly growing. It's going to stifle that. And maybe, if you have a standard and you feel like I can do better than the standard, why would I want to not innovate,
Yeah, but the thing about standards is they're never generally the absolute ultimate of anything.
Yeah.
It's
what becomes adopted.
Yeah. Going back to ProRes RAW again, I think that is why ProRes RAW is going to win. Because it's ProRes, but RAW. ProRes is the standard. It's quite clear that pretty much everybody is adopting
adaptation.
Yeah,
VHS, beta cam.
Does it offer at this current moment in time every single feature that perhaps some other RAW formats offer? No.
But you look at the still industry as an example of, they have a very established RAW. They don't all use the same RAW. Every time a new camera comes out, you have to update your software to use it.
It's a mess.
It is a mess.
It's a complete mess.
But that hasn't changed, and that's even more so. It's popular. Maybe in our video industry, we might be able to do that because we're not dealing with the massive amount of cameras that they're selling to consumers as stills.
But also it's like one person, like photographer. It's like one photographer processing their own images. So in a way, if you're in Canon world, you can be in Canon world. You're Nikon world. You're Nikon world. Right? And for some people, especially vloggers, bloggers, and people who make the most noise on the internet, I have to say, and I'm not anti-vlogger or anything, but these, the voices that you hear are always those voices, not people who are working with multiple cameras, trying to cut them in, bring them into production houses, work through a chain of everything, where you do need standards because it matters, because if your footage doesn't fit with the next guy's and you're on a 30-minute deadline to cut something, that's a problem.
Yeah. Well, even cameras that are from the same manufacturer don't even match, which is
a problem.
Really a problem. I think Panasonic's really trying hard to do that, probably more so than the others.
S1H is one of the most compelling reasons. Actually, we haven't talked about S1H, but S1H is one of the most compelling reasons to buy Eva 1 now. I think even though Eva 1's kind of like older life cycle camera. Yeah. If you want 2 matching cameras, that's looking pretty good. People are telling me that looks really nice, and nobody else is doing that spec at the moment in a mirrorless. So if you really need to shoot mirrorless and a larger camera side by side, there's definitely compelling reason to do that. Plus they both do ProRes RAW, which is even better, so or they will do.
Should move on to audio.
Yes, absolutely. And audio is kind of exciting because I don't think we've really talked a lot about audio at shows. This year was very interesting, and one that I find it's just fascinating is that 32-bit float. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's got secret sauce right there. That's going to really save you, especially if you're a run and gunner, documenting, doing news, having no blown out levels anymore, no too low levels, and that's just crazy science. But it's being implemented. It has some really cool mics too.
Well, yeah. Going back to the 32-bit RAW, 32-bit float. Getting confused with the camera thing. Scale.
It is kind of. It's like the audio equivalent.
It's audio equivalent of RAW, and I think they probably to their disadvantage, they haven't really explained it very well, I think, to the general public or consumers or people who are interested. Maybe sound guys understand this very clearly, but for us camera guys, it's like you hear 32-bit float and you're like, what the hell is 32-bit float? And it's quite interesting because, as you said, it's literally, the best way to explain it, it's like raw audio recording. So the whole idea is you get this massive amount of dynamic range and headroom, So it doesn't matter if you're out recording by yourself and you can't adjust the audio all the time, and that audio gets clipped or you've knocked a dial and it's recorded very low, you can recover all that audio and have it pristine with no noise floor, and that's
Fantastic.
a huge deal.
Yeah, huge deal.
But as ever, back to the standards conversation, the way the NLEs and all the audio plugins and stuff work hasn't yet quite adapted to 32-bit RAW.
Well, I think in most
32-bit
I think it's actually
We're just going to change the name.
32-bit RAW video. That's the secret sauce. We haven't got there yet. No, we're a little bit of ways away from that.
the guy from Sound Devices was telling me that most of the NLEs now are supporting 32-bit float. So if you put it in there, it'll actually recognise it and you'll be able to do it. So you don't need any specific type of plug-in or software to be able to work with it.
Fantastic. Any microphones you guys saw that you really liked?
Deity? How do you say it?
Deity.
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 Deity. Yeah. Anyway,
Depends on what side
they
of the
had
country
that
you're
pretty interesting couple of mics. One that wasn't brand new, but then I think they showed a smaller. I don't know what they're like, 2 something. I don't know, whatever it is. Tiny little,
S2, the mini S2.
yeah, I mean it's it's kind of a low cost mic that still seems to be usable in boom.
And they have a new transmitter
camera
for their system that records. And there's always our American patent issues. That
you guys ain't getting it.
people.
You ain't getting it. Or you're taking many trips to Europe to buy it.
Oh, that was the Technical Sync, wasn't it?
The Track E is a new device from Technical Sync that, boy, they just got that thing working 3 days before the show. They were really excited. It looks really great, but they're going to have to deal with the same problem.
I think that is the biggest problem. The biggest market on the planet. Well, maybe the second biggest in China. Depends how that goes. But anyway, you can't buy any of that stuff.
Right.
So licensing and
patents. I mean, I get that part. I mean, I don't want to go into that stuff because it's pretty deep. But you have to think about the other side of it. If you create something, you got to protect it. It's yours, and you do deserve to own it. But it does stifle. It really puts us all back. There could be some really great products that are better than the ones that were actually patented.
I mean, I think everybody knows the US patent system is kind of busted in want of a better word.
His words, not ours.
Could be.
Yeah.
I said could.
I'm not saying that, I mean, I do think perhaps what we should all do is step back and credit people who put a lot of work into something.
Yeah.
And that this work did not come for free. Now, you can argue who did work on what, now that's a whole other question. But I think, the unsung heroes of this whole thing are actually, not the salespeople, the people you see on the booths or whatever else. They're these engineers sitting out there in the back, kind of, trying to figure it all out, navigating a world of patents and all that. If you're going to nod your hat to somebody, or tip your hat, whatever you call it. Anyway.
The best products are always made by the companies that have engineers that talk to their user base. When those two things come together, magic happens, and we really get what we need. All right, guys. Well, this was a great show. I had a good time. I always love coming to Amsterdam. It's a little cold out here. A little cold. We had a couple nice days, but it's always like that.
Thanks for having me back, anyway.
Yeah, and
I wasn't sure you were going to have me back after all this time.
But no, I had a great time. If there's anything you want to take us out on, you guys have any final thoughts?
No, I think there's lots of stuff on the site. You can check out everything that we've covered over the last 4 days and continue to check on the site for updates.
Mm-hmm. I have one last question for you.
Okay.
Are shows like this still relevant?
Oh, absolutely. I think so. But I do think that because of the cinema and broadcast, not versus, are becoming kind of separated a little bit more, and I think it would be better to have something for us that maybe we would consider ourselves more filmmakers versus broadcasters. There's a lot of space in there. I'm not interested in at all.
What do you mean you're not in the market for a satellite truck?
Right,
oh my word! Really?
Exactly. And that's
8K cloud over IP service.
Yeah, I think Cine Gear is a really good show for folks like us. I mean, obviously I'm in broadcast, but I'm not interested in 8K over IP. I'm not interested in live trucks and satellite links and all that fun
We are
stuff.
seeing a lot of manufacturers now who are deciding not to come to shows, and I think we're going to continue to see a bit of a trend of that because it's becoming very expensive to come here, and it's because a lot of things are getting announced, and because of social media and the internet now, there's a proliferation of information across there that you can get access to without actually having to physically come to a show. But it's still got their place to a certain extent.
Yep, definitely. And the internet thing is a little bit interesting because these products are now being released like a week before the shows, and kind of takes our thunder away. We love to come to these things and get all excited because we have a brand new
you still
product.
find those little nuggets.
Oh, they're out there for sure. For sure they're out there. All right, guys. Well, that's it for us. Dan Chung, Matt Allard, and Erik Naso from Newsshooter.com. Hope you go to the site, check out all the material. How many spots did we actually get on there? I think it's like over,
60.
like more than 60. Man, I don't know how we do it. All right, thanks a lot for watching. Make sure to go to the site. Have a wonderful day.